All right, transient shapers. What are they? What do they do? How can we use them? I want to start with a picture. So a transient we have talked about a lot. A transient is that kind of explosive attack of amplitude in a waveform, in a sound. We often think of them mostly with drums, but just about everything has some level of transient. A consonant sound from a vocal is going to have a transient. So, and then we have kind of the tail, the sustain of that particular sound. What transient shapers allow us to do is to manipulate, either to raise and accentuate or lower and smooth out the transient, the initial transient of these sounds, as well as to kind of raise or lower, extending the sustain of the tail of the sound. So in a way, one would say, well, isn't that this is kind of almost in the zone of a compressor, because a compressor certainly can tap down on a transient if the attack is set super fast. It can allow the transient to go through and then kind of push down on the sustain, which also kind of helps to accentuate the transient. But what a transient shaper, they're not threshold dependent. So in a certain sense, they are doing similar things, but I would say kind of in a much easier and straightforward way, you can get specific outcomes. So the first thing you might think of when thinking about, okay, well, what would I want to be able to accentuate in terms of transients? You're going to think about drums. So just listening to this snare drum, and I've turned off the gate and any compression that I had on it. I still have the EQ. I'm going to go into dynamics and choose the transient master. Okay, and transient master is a transient shaper from Native Instruments. It's very, very straightforward. You have attack, control, sustain, gain, limit, and smooth. Attack is to the right. You are increasing, you are raising the level of that initial transient. If you go to the left and lower it, you are smoothing it out. Think punchy versus kind of sitting in the background, and not, the opposite, smooth. Sustain, raising the tail, extending essentially the length of the sound. Gain is essentially compensation. When you raise the transient level, you are raising the volume. Some transient shapers have automatic gain compensation. This one does not. I may or may not use this. I could just go to my fader and make adjustments to my mix once I use the shaper. They give you a limiter essentially built into this path, that as you are raising, the gain of a transient, you may need to limit before clipping. So that's there. And smooth, Native Instruments claims, is really specifically for less transient heavy, more distortion based instruments, or for guitars, generally speaking, to not introduce unwanted artifacts. Let's look at this snare drum. So again, it's just the EQ on it. I want to increase the attack. So it's definitely cutting through. I'm going to... Okay, well, let's talk about that for a second. I turned off the gate, so I have all this bleed. I'm going to lower the sustain, not only to specifically to create a punchy and kind of shorter snare drum, but we are also, by doing that, we're going to get, a tractor just rode by. It looks like a massive bee stinger with a drill bit on the front. Okay, lower the sustain. So by shortening the sound of the drum, you're also cutting out all this bleed. Now, I would probably, for this, go somewhere in between. Now, this is one of those things, if you're using this, on a snare drum in a live mix like this, we want to listen in context. So definitely able to get a lot more attack out of that snare. If I add it to the under snare, the bottom mic, much punchier snare sound. Without going too long on this, let's take a look at a kick. The attack is going to get me much more of the beater. And depending on genre, if this were like a metal song, I would raise this up super high and maybe shorten the sustain. Let's see what happens. Okay, so on its own, I don't really like it. We have kind of increased the clickiness of it. It's super short, but remember, we have multiple mics. At least in this instance, we have the sub kick that might give us that bottom that we lost by raising the attack so much. Okay, so pretty clear use case on drums. On the bass, if I'm increasing the attack, you're hearing more of the string pull. No sustain there. No attack. Okay. Would I use it in this instance? Probably not. Not on this cut. Not on this song. It doesn't need it. Guitar. Let's see what's going on. Okay. Increased attack. There you hear like a lot of the pick. Again, not feeling it so much, but I could imagine it with tight rhythm guitars. Bang, bang. Just kind of bringing that out, some reggae. Very, very cool things can happen with loops. I brought a loop in here for demonstration. Where'd it go? Let's put this back to 0. Okay, let's listen without. Let's raise the attack. Well, notice something about this loop. There's a lot of that vinyl noise, some reverb and room sound. Let's cut the sustain. Okay, no attack, lots of sustain. Now it's not so much a drum loop as it almost is kind of like a rhythmic texture. Okay, hopefully that gives you some cool ideas. Now, did I leave this ready to go? Yeah, check this out. So as an experiment, I took the entire drum kit and I bussed it to an aux, and I put a transient shaper on the aux. And the goal was, what I wanted to see if I could take like a similar idea with the loop and kind of create almost the sense of room mics. that we didn't set up. So there are no room mics on this drum kit. Let's bring it down. Let's not bring it down. Let's lower the attack and increase the sustain. Okay, so if I were to solo the drums, you get more space. You do. Little bit of attack. Okay, do I love it? I'm not sure. But just getting creative and thinking, what can you do with a transient shaper? Enjoy.